Thank you for joining Analytics Today, a podcast series that focuses on big data and analytics and latest trends in the digital world. I am your host, Dr. Jeremy Roberts, and with me always is our other host, Samir Khan. How are you, Samir?
Hey, how are you, Jeremy?
Good. This is great. Excited to be back on again. Samir and I have been focusing on, more topics, more frequency, trying to come up with really cool stuff that you guys would have an interest in. And I don't know if you know this, but Samir is kind of an expert in generative AI. And it's one of those things to where, I know over the break and over a lot of different things, you started to do a ton of research. And based on all that research, we're able to find out a lot of different things. And one of the topics that we came up with was something really cool. And we've decided that today's topic is going to be 3 strategies to integrate generative AI for a busy CIO, right?
So that's going to be the topic for today, and it's a very exciting topic.
Yeah, so if you want, let me give the brief overview, and then Samir, if you want to go into the importance of GenAI, kind of like what GenAI is, to make sure everybody's on the same page, because somebody might say, well, is that ChatGPT or is that not? So for really, let's start with really what it is. And it's really to, when you talk about the transformative properties of GenAI, you have to really understand that when companies bring in new technologies, there can be a lot of pitfalls. There can be a lot of problems and issues. There can be a lot of things that happen that can go wrong. And when you're bringing in something as powerful as GenAI, you can't just implement it like everything else, right? It's not the same implementation. You got to do it a little bit different, right? So I think let's start with that. If you want to go, Samir, let's start with what is GenAI, right? And really, how is that possibly different from ChatGPT and other stuff? And then we go to the next part.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, a lot of people now are getting aware of GenAI. And since this podcast is directed to a CIO, they probably already are aware of what GenAI is. But again, this is a public podcast. A lot of people that may listen to this may have been recently introduced to GenAI or may not even know GenAI. So we have both sides of the spectrums, like people who are really advanced, they're using it, people who are kind of middle, planning to use it, and then people who are getting their feet wet and they're just trying to understand how GenAI can help me. So for that, I like your idea of doing a quick high-level primer on what GenAI is. GenAI is generative AI. And essentially today, GenAI models are called large language models because they're using a significantly large learning base, knowledge base. Like, for example, ChatGPT, which was introduced by OpenAI in the fall of 2022, is a generative AI model. And from that, many different types of model originated. ChatGPT was focused primarily 100% on text. Now it's getting advanced. It's also learning different types of content like video, images, and what have you. Similarly, Google Bard is another GenAI technology. Midjourney is a GenAI technology focused on images, and DALL-E is also a GenAI technology focused on images. So there are a variety of these types of technologies that are coming in that are allowing us to quickly perform tasks. Like I always say, ChatGPT is one of my favorite employees because whatever I tell ChatGPT to produce textually and contextually, it goes and does that. But at the same time, ChatGPT is an employee. I always tell that on my Twitter, that ChatGPT is just an employee and you need to give it proper instructions and proper prompts. And I actually have a newsletter also that we run on this topic, like how do you write effective prompts? So the idea is to make sure that you use GenAI properly and not treat that as your executive team. So if you're a CIO, it can be your best friend, but it can be your best employee, but it's not going to take your place yet in the ChatGPT version 4 we're talking.
For those people that get a little excited, and I'm going to just phrase it in a nice way. For those people that get really excited and say, ChatGPT is going to take my job or AI is going to take all your jobs. No, it's not. It's not going to take your job. It's an input system. It's an input-output system. You have to create the proper prompt and a proper data input in order to create an output. That output, and we're going to talk about that actually in today's topic, is it does not recognize soft skills, right? It does not recognize the need for people and those soft skills. So let's start with it. Let's just jump into this, right? So when we talk about the importance of it, right? When you're bringing on a new technology, the first thing we got to do is we got to recognize challenges, right? What are the key challenges when you're implementing technology as powerful as it? So let me give the first one, Samir, and we'll go through three challenges. I'll give the first one, and then we can give a little highlight for each one. So the first one is, we say that when you're implementing this Gen AI, what we're saying is you got to use an all-in approach, right? We're not just saying only find one single isolated part of the business and implement it there. No, we're not saying that. You got to go all in, right? And you know, the problem is that when you do this, it could have these problems, right? And you're like, oh, it's going to create a higher cost. It's going to create a higher
tell me what is,
complexity.
like, let's first help the listeners understand what is all in.
All in. Okay.
What do you mean by all in?
So what we're saying is you can't half-ass it, right? You can't just come in and you bring in a technology. You can't just say we're going to try it out for a little bit. You really got to put in the effort. You got to put in the longevity of it. You got to make sure that when you implement it, you got to make sure that that tool is implemented and you see it all the way through to success, right? You got to really put in the effort and invest into it. That's when we say all in. But the challenge is,
so you have to go. So for example, like we do MVPs, right? So
yes.
Are you suggesting that we should not do MVP at all, or we should still do MVP before we go all in?
No, the MVP is a part of the all in. As you go there, it's a marathon, not a race. And so we'll get to the recommendation on that. But the thing is, when you do that all in approach, which is the great way, the problem is it's going to create these challenges. So it's going to create higher costs, right? It's going to create all these complexities. It's going to create technical debt. And you got to recognize that all that's going to happen, right? Mm-hmm. And so once all that happens, then you say, okay, how do we fix that, right? So maybe, you know what, instead of going through the key challenges, how about let's just let's go through the recommendations for each of the ones so we can stay on that topic right there, if that's cool, right? So let's
talk about the all-in approach and kind of what is the recommendation. Let's talk about that.
When you come in and you're going to do a technology all in, you have to invest. Nobody has ever said, hey, Samir, we're bringing this new technology, and then all of a sudden what we want to do is just kind of try it out for a little bit to see if it works. And if it doesn't work the first time, we're going to step back away. Nobody does that, right? You invest your time into it. The key is what we call is you have to adopt a strategy using a proof of concept, right? Or an MVP or a proof of concept or a POC model. And what you do is by doing that, you help to then mitigate long-term risks, right? You're going to do that to maximize your potential. And you're also going to help prepare to deploy that across the company through that all-in process. But in order to get to the big, you got to start with the small. Does that make sense?
Let's take a scenario on that one, right?
Sure.
So you said that first you said all-in approach, and then in part of the all-in approach, you can adopt a MVP or a pilot of some sort, right?
Correct.
So I'm a CIO, I'm working in a mid-size or large company, right? And I want to figure out a way to deploy generative AI. Now, a lot of companies today are struggling with generative AI, especially the larger ones, because they're going through this evolution of, hey, this is my proprietary data, this is my proprietary content. If I introduce Gen AI in my organization, then I'm going to experience some loss of revenue share because of the proprietary information being leaked into the OpenAI large language models and whatnot. So in that case, where do you feel that I should start? Like what department that I should start, and maybe slowly expand from there and kind of do that testing? What is your opinion about that?
So when you look at all the different revenue cost areas, a lot of times you're going to look at the key areas that have the bigger areas of focus. And those are going to be around customer experience, customer retention, and revenue growth. What you don't want to do is put all of your time and effort into things that are going to shake the boat too much, right? It should end up in the customer experience center, but what you should do is try it in areas to where you won't really rock the boat too much, right? There are
Okay. So
automated
like, for
systems.
example, answering common customer queries.
Yes. Actually,
Marketing is one of the one area, right?
Yeah, one thing we actually talked about, and I think you and I had this conversation about, is when there's automations you can build out for note-taking features that that creates transcripts or transcribes your meetings, and then is able to take those notes and upload those into a wiki. And I think that would even be a perfect place, because if you think about it,
that's great.
I mean, a lot of times when you're speaking to customers and you got to do transcribe those calls, the last thing you want to just take all those notes. No, throw it into a generative AI, and that generative AI will then output it into this note feature, and then it'll send out an email to everybody else saying, hey, here's everything that we talked about. Here are the top key points. That would be a perfect place to start for me.
Yeah. And another area for me, that's a great recommendation. The other area that for me is your learning center. So you already have a ton of videos in your learning center. Some could be long, some could be short, right? You can take and translate those videos into a shorter bite. Like I always do this. I see this YouTube video, I'm really interested in it, but I don't have time to watch the 1.5 hour show. So I'm just going to take that, put it in BART and say, hey, summarize 10 key topics from this with the takeaway for me and action items, and boom, there you have it. Like I have the list of actionable items from the video, so I don't have to spend watching the entire video. So that 100%. You can do the same thing as a CIO, implement that into your learning center, whichever learning platform that you're using nowadays. Most of them, they come with GenAI, and then give your employees who are going through the certification course in your learning center or your own university to summarize these videos relatively quickly so they can learn fast.
So you're basically, and to get back to Samir's initial questions, you're implementing them into efficiency centers, right? You're not trying to put them in cost and revenue centers, because if you're testing out proofs of concept in revenue centers and customer-facing centers, it's easy to make mistakes, it's easy to fail, and then all of a sudden you're not going to go through with that all in and get to the end goal. You're going to stop because you're going to find some failures and you're going to get scared. And then all of a sudden you're going to say, oh, this is not working. We're going to pull the plug before something else goes wrong because this customer's already upset, right? Find areas that you can create efficiency centers. And that efficiency center is exactly what Samir and I are talking about. Those are two great examples to where use that point of or proof of concept approach, right? Where basically you identify the project, you go do the proof of concept, you create the prototype, you then go with the pilot project, and then from that you put into implementation, and you're testing along the way, right? You're doing your testing, you're doing your risk assessment, but this is purely in non-customer facing areas where you don't have to worry that you're going to affect revenue, because we all know at the end of the day, creating higher efficiencies creates higher revenues, right? So put them into these efficiency centers, which is
perfect. Let's go to the next one then.
Fantastic. Okay, so when you look at the second one is interesting because we talked about that first key challenge is you're isolating and then departmentalizing that GenAI, and so the activation may not scale for long-term adoption. And that comes back to the first one, right? Remember the first one we talked about, I said you're not thinking about it all in, you're thinking about just this one little tiny area, and you're only going to keep it isolated to that. That is a recipe for success, because if you isolate and departmentalize your generative AI and you activate it to where it never scales and it never then connects systems, then you're basically leaving it up to chance to be able to get, cut from budget. Because you and I have had this experience in our life to where we've onboarded a new tool and we signed a 1-year deal with that. All of a sudden the budget changed, and that tool has a single focus or a single purpose. And that single purpose is it does this specific thing, and it's not connected to anything else. So what happens when the budget gets cut? Oh, you can live without it because it only has a single focus or a single purpose. Cut it.
Right.
Yeah. And so
then what you're trying to say,
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is basically now that you have invested in it, you did the POC, and the POC was successful. Then you don't isolate it to that specific department. You can continuing to
correct.
expand in the department. So let's say if you start with your marketing department, or we were talking
Yes,
about your learning center, then you try to expand to your maybe customer service could be the next one, and
yes,
maybe I don't know, operations could be the other one. So you start growing
absolutely.
it in order to fully capitalize on the investments that you have made in Gen AI, and for it to
Yes.
provide the ultimate return on investment for your organization,
So when we talk about the
right?
journey, when we talk about the journey, the idea is find one department, like an efficiency center department, and try it out right there. Try it out. Make sure you go through all your testing models, your efficiency models. Make sure it's got resilience. Make sure you have redundancies just in case to back it up, and so on. And that you can see that it's creating efficiencies in time so it can scale. Now that it's done that, from that, you are going to start to complicate things. This is where the idea of a center of excellence comes in, right? And Samir and I have actually built some center of excellences before in our work. And the idea around the center of excellence is you're then creating this opportunity to say, let's now bring together people or leaders from the different key areas, whether it's customer experience or whether it's marketing or sales or operations or whatever. Let's bring them in and say, hey, let's talk about this tool and how it's going to then take itself out of this isolated area and move into these bigger areas, right? Because that's,
I like that.
I guess maybe,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, when you think about it, I took some notes around like, what can you do with a center of excellence? You're going to increase employee productivity and utilization because you're making sure that management understands how they're being effectively used to create these efficiencies. You're best utilizing their time. You're increasing potential customer loyalty, right, and retention, because then those employees' services will then be able to build efficiencies around that, right? You're creating these like frictionless customer journeys because now you have pass-through models, right? There's all these different things that you can do once you start spreading an amazing tool like generative AI across the business. But that center of excellence is key.
So a little bit on that. So what is a center of excellence? So just so that some people are getting used to this term, I know
Sure.
you and I have established center of excellence in many different organizations, but for people who are not necessarily
Yeah.
aware, or what are the things that they need to do, if you want to highlight that?
Yeah, well, let me give you an example, and let me use a visual example. Think about a hub and spoke. When you look at a wheel is round, right? In the middle of that is the hub, and you have the different spokes on that wheel, right? And so if you think about it, each of that hub is the meeting center to where everybody comes together. Think about it as like every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, you have a leader or a representative who has the ability to make a decision, right, to come into that meeting, and we all collectively speak about it. We use the same data sets, the same key points, and from that center of excellence, we identify what is the best output to be able to take and translate the IT focus into a business focus, right? What is the return on investment in this implementation of an IT? Where the spoke comes in is the spoke says, now that that team, that center core team, has decided the value and the use of that tool, we then become the spokesperson out to, when you look at the wheel, right, back out to the outer parts, we then become the spokesperson back out to those individual teams, and they become the individualized expert out in those areas, right? To where they say, okay, our center of excellence talked about this. Here's how we're going to do it. We're all using the same best practices, the same implementation tools, the same training centers, the same data inputs. Everything's the same. That way, you've learned from your past mistakes, right? So you don't remake the same mistakes over and over, and you don't have 5 different teams trying to do 5 different things, different ways.
And there's also like power users in there, in different areas, right? So,
but it's a business-led, actually it's an IT-led business function. If you think about it like that, the concept is it's an IT-led business function where you have representatives from product, from IT, from business, from marketing, from sales, even people in finance, and everybody's in there, but you have to have that key mix. It's always business and IT have to be in the same room. right?
So that's
Because with that,
allowing global collaboration and kind of impacting the overall experience. I would say total experience, employees, customers together, right?
exactly.
Okay,
It's a
great.
unique model, but the thing is, if you think about it, when it comes back to the original challenge that Samir and I were talking about, the original challenge is you're saying rather than just taking this amazing tool and plopping it into the marketing department and say, hey, marketing department, you go use it. Just put it in this one little thing. But what happens to marketing's budget all the time? It gets cut constantly, right? So let's say their budget gets cut, that tool's gone forever. And you spent
Right.
all this time and money implementing it. So what we want to do is say, let's build out a centralized need for it and let's start to use it for everything. And I think you and I did that with social listening. We actually used, back in the day, you and I used social listening as a tool when we brought that into a company. We said, look, we're going to then build social listening platform, and we're going to be able to use that and build out dashboards for each of the different departments. They can understand what people are saying, what people are talking about. And it was huge. But when it works, it works.
I remember
when it
that
doesn't,
very well.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
great. Awesome.
Okay,
That's good. So let's talk about what other challenges. Is there a third one there?
Yeah, we have a third one. So the third one is, so when you're employing GenAI, right, and all you're trying to do is just achieve this large transformational initiative, and you're just trying to create this higher time to value due to potential complexities and all this stuff, you're going to have these problems because all you're trying to do is solve really big problems, right? When it comes down to it, if you bring in GenAI to say, all we're trying to do is make really big changes, solve really big problems. We're going to boil the ocean. What's that other phrase? We're going to use a silver bullet to completely transform the company, right? What you're doing is that higher time to value. Say it's going to take us forever to really find out how we're going to be able to solve all these problems, because then what you do is you bring on all these complexities. You're going to have then tech adoption barriers because there's going to be teams. Like what it usually happens, we have a great tool, and then let me give an example. You pass it to HR. HR is really not a high tech division or department. They're going to have tech adoption barriers. They're going to say, whoa, you guys using this stuff, we're using our own stuff. We have our own way of doing things, right? But then if you take forever to find that value, you're going to have lower cost options coming in. You took forever to find it, and all of a sudden, all these replacement products are going to come in, which is a huge problem.
So the change management, I think, is the biggest problem, right? Especially organizations that are going through massive changes and doing this massive transformation projects.
Yeah.
Then you're going to experience, like you gave an example of HR. They don't necessarily have. They may or may not have the necessarily skill set to adopt a new technology tool or skill set. So then you'll have to go through holding their hands and walking them through the ladder, up the ladder, and the complexities that comes with it.
If they're willing to even accept it. Even if they're willing to accept
it, right? Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's going to be people who like the traditional way of doing things, and good for them. But the problem is, and when you are trying to do this transformation, you have to bypass those traditional way of doing things and get people onboarded, and that's always a challenge when it comes to change management.
Absolutely. And so when Samir and I were talking about this, we were thinking, what is the best recommendation we can give, right? So when you think about it, if a CIO or an IT department or even the Center of Excellence is trying to say, man, we have these huge transportation or transformational initiatives, and we have all of these issues coming down on us, and leadership is saying, we spent a ton of money on this, and you guys haven't seen this. What is happening? Why are we not seeing these revenue outputs? Why are we not seeing what's this term called time to value? Why are we not seeing time to value? Well, the focus is wrong. And the focus is wrong because Samir and I were thinking about is what you have to do is not focus on revenue, but you got to focus on optimization, data-driven output, and creating efficiency. Because
which entails, like, especially if you're targeting CIO, I would say ultimately the CIO is going to be held accountable for OpEx reduction or revenue growth. So ultimately, yes, I completely agree with you that you're going to see those operational efficiencies. You're going to see the scale. You're going to see faster adoption to the technology. and improve overall skill set in the organization, which if you translate into the value, you will see impact on your bottom line revenue,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Because now you're having your HR is a great example. Now your HR, and I'm not like a proponent of like you roll out Gen AI, you lay off a whole bunch of people. That's not what we're
Yeah.
saying. But you don't necessarily. Here's a good example. Let's say if you have 100 people HR organization for a large company, where you have a certain amount of tasks like employee onboarding, right? It takes monumental effort
Mm-hmm.
to go through the employee, get them to the
Yeah.
training, get them in this 1 week or 2 weeks adoption. Versus if you can reduce that to, if it's a 2 week, we can reduce it to 1 week or maybe even less. Now you have a really good employee onboarding program where employees can come in and everything is set. They can go to a HR agent, chat GPT, that can provide them everything that they want to get onboarded, and they don't have to go back and forth on the email. All that time that you're wasting today for employee onboarding can be improving overall the efficiency in that process. So that's just one example, and that's going to impact your costs, because those HR employees that are now focused on going back and forth on this email and getting employee onboarded manually, they can be focused on some other talent growth activities, like how can I deploy programs to grow my employee, upskill them, and build a more talented organization. So that's how you can start to see the benefits of Gen AI versus just like implementing robots and laying off your employee. That's typically what
100%.
CIO might think, but that's not what we're recommending.
No. So when you look at the key challenges again, we'll go over those real fast again so we can bring it all together. The first one we say is like, you're trying to use this all-in approach, right? Which is great because you're there for the long haul. You're there for the implementation, not to say we've tried a few things and it keeps breaking or we're not going to give it its full effort. No. You got to keep trying. You got to, you bring in something like Gen AI. This is a company-wide initiative, right? This is a big deal. So you bring in a Gen AI and you understand there's going to have these complexities, going to have these technical debt. Great, right? It's going to happen. But what you got to realize, you got to start slow. You got to start with a proof of concept. You got to show that it works. You got to show that, you're going to test it throughout. You're going to look at your failures. But when you're doing that, you're going to help that mitigate that risk. You're going to maximize the potential, and you're going to make sure it's then deployed across the company. The second challenge we looked at is, don't just stick it in one department and leave it there. No, that's not what it's talking about. What we want to do is we want to activate it for really long-term adoption. So you do this by using that first initiative, right? The test center. Once it's proven in that test center, you then create a center of excellence, the hub and spoke model, bring it across your business, and then spread it out to different centers to where then it goes from these efficiency centers into the cost and profit centers, right? Then you can affect customer service, but don't test it in customer service first. Test it on internal systems. The third thing we talked about was these huge transformational efforts, right? And it's going to be a problem. There's going to be these complexities. There's going to be lower cost options. Don't worry about that. Right? Focus on optimization. Focus on building efficiencies.
Yeah, don't lose focus. I mean, obviously you're going to get worried, but don't lose focus, right? That's the main message here. Perfect. Awesome.
No, this is
fantastic.
Huge stuff. And the thing is, and you're sitting there thinking, okay, let me give you an example, and then Samir and I can wrap up today. But the first example is, you're thinking, you know what? I'm not an IT guy. I listen to your podcast and I'm a marketing analytics guy. How does this relate to me? Oh, how does this relate to you? You're a part of that center of excellence, right? This is your job as the marketing or analytics or data person to be able to go and build this relationship with IT, right? If you go and find the generative AI technology and bring it to IT and say, hey, I want to do this implementation, now you know how to bring it to them, right? Now you know how to take it to them and say, I've got an idea, but I've got a strategic approach so we don't mess up. You know what I mean?
No, this is great. Yeah, I think those are all very valid examples, irrespective of the department that you are in, whether you are in IT or whether you're in analytics or data, or you are in marketing or sales, finance, operations. So I think everything comes together here, and people need to collaborate. And as a role from a CIO standpoint, your responsibility is to make sure that you are building this center of excellence in your organization.
Mm-hmm. I agree,
And
100%.
you're at the center of excellence, right? From a CIO
Yes,
perspective.
exactly. So I think with that, I
Great.
think we have everything we need. I think in summary, this, like I said, you know, it's how do I say this? It's a marathon, not a race, right? It's a journey. It's going to take time. Generative AI is difficult, right? When you bring it on board, understand that it you got to test it out. You got to make sure that you do it the right way and take the right approach, or else it's going to be a painful approach and it's going to hurt. You know what I mean? And you're going to see a lot of failures before you find any wins or successes. But outside of that, we're really excited. We're doing more frequency in our podcast. You can definitely find us on our YouTube page now. New software, new technologies, better cameras. We're making the investment for you guys. So very excited.